She didn't expect him to be so still. Most men, when they saw her step off the stage, did something, shifted their weight, cleared their throat, looked away too fast or not fast enough. Teddy Callum didn't move at all. He stood at the edge of the platform with his hat in both hands and watched her come down the steps the way a man watches weather roll in from the west. Not afraid, not excited, just waiting to see what it was going to do. Mirabel Knox had been told about him. Her aunt had written 3 letters over the course of 6 months, each one a little more insistent than the last. He's a good man, Mira. Quiet, but good. The land is solid. You won't go hungry. Her aunt had never once mentioned what he looked like, which meant either she'd forgotten or she'd decided it wasn't the point. It wasn't the point. Mirabel knew that. She'd known it since she signed her name on the arrangement papers, in a solicitor's office in Knoxville, with her hand shaking so badly that the signature looked like something a child had done. She was 24 years old. She had $11 and a carpetbag, and the man she was going to marry was standing 30 feet away looking at her like she was a problem he hadn't planned for. She walked toward him anyway. "Miss Knox," he said when she reached him. "Mr. Callum." He looked at her for a moment. Just one moment, but long enough that she felt it, and then he nodded once and turned toward the wagon. That was it. That was the hello. She picked up her bag and followed him. The town of Harrow Creek sat in a fold of land between 2 ridgelines in eastern Montana, the kind of place that looked temporary even after 40 years of existing. One main street, a general store, a church with a crooked steeple, a saloon that was always open and a schoolhouse that wasn't always open, and a post office that shared its building with the barber. Mirabel counted the buildings as the wagon rolled past. She counted them because counting was something to do with her hands when she couldn't hold on to anything else. Teddy Callum drove the way he stood, without wasted motion. His hands were easy on the reins and he didn't speak, and after a while she stopped waiting for him to and looked at the country instead. It was not like Tennessee. Nothing about it was like Tennessee. It was bigger in a way that felt personal, like the land was making a point about how small you were. The sky went on forever in every direction and the grass was silver green and bent in the wind like it was bowing to something. Mirabel had grown up in a valley where the hills closed in on you from both sides, where you always knew exactly where you were because there was always something taller nearby to tell you. Out here there was nothing taller. Out here you were on your own. "How far is the ranch?" she asked. 40 minutes. She waited. He didn't add anything. "Is it good land?" "Good enough." She looked at the side of his face. He had a strong jaw and a cut along his cheekbone that was still healing, and she wanted to ask about that, but she didn't. She'd been told he was 31. He looked 31 and also like he'd been 31 for a very long time. "I'm not fragile," she said. He glanced at her. "I didn't say you were. You're talking to me like I am." A pause, then very quietly, "Fair enough." He didn't talk more after that, but the silence changed. She noticed the difference even if she couldn't have explained it. The Callum Ranch was called the Bridal Creek, though Mirabel couldn't find a creek on the property her first week there. There were 3 outbuildings, a barn that leaned slightly east, a bunkhouse where 2 hired hands lived, and the main house, which was made of timber and river stone and had a porch that ran the length of the front face. Inside there were 4 rooms and a stove that drew well, and windows that let in the afternoon light in a way that almost made the place feel like it was trying. The housekeeper, a stout woman named Rowena Dale, who'd worked for Teddy's family since before he was born, showed Mirabel where everything was kept and told her the rules of the kitchen and the schedule for laundry and the fact that Mr. Callum took his coffee before sunrise and didn't like it talked about. Mirabel thanked her and unpacked her carpetbag into the second bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed for a long time looking at the wall. They were married 3 days later in the Harrow Creek church with Rowena as a witness and a neighbor named Hatch Dooley as the other. A sun-weathered man who shook Mirabel's hand afterward with both of his and said, "You're a brave woman," in a tone that was kind but also made her want to ask exactly what he meant by that. Teddy said nothing during the ceremony except what was required of him. His voice was low and even, and he looked at her when he said the words and didn't look away. She gave him credit for that. Afterward, they drove back to the ranch and Rowena had made a supper that was more elaborate than usual, a roast and a dried apple cake. And they ate it together in something that was not quite comfortable silence, and not quite awkward silence, but some third thing that didn't have a name yet. "Thank you," Mirabel said when she'd finished. "It's good. Rowena made it. Teddy said. I know that. She set down her fork. I was including you. He looked at her. For the house, she said. For all of this, you didn't have to go through the arrangement. You chose to. So did you? I did, she agreed. But I know why I did. I don't know why you did. She hadn't meant to say that last part. It came out anyway, the way things do when you're tired and far from home and sitting across a table from a man you married this morning. Teddy was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the wind moved through the grass and one of the horses shifted in the barn. My mother wrote to your aunt, he finally said. She thought it was time. She's been gone 2 years now, my mother, and she made me promise before she went. He paused. I was going to wait longer. But a promise is a promise. It was the most he'd said to her at one time since she arrived. I'm sorry about your mother, Mirabel said. She would have liked you. He said it plainly, like a fact, not a comfort. Then he stood and took his plate to the basin and went to check on the horses, and Mirabel sat in the lamplight alone and thought about the particular loneliness of being in a place that was almost home. She learned the ranch the way you learn a language when you're already grown. Slowly, with effort, through embarrassing mistakes. She tried to help with morning chores and let out one of the horses by accident and spent 40 minutes in the mud catching it before Teddy appeared and caught it with 3 steps and a soft word. He didn't laugh. She was grateful for that and also slightly furious about it because she would have felt better if he'd laughed. She burned the first 2 batches of bread she tried to make. She got lost going to the south pasture fence line and had to wait for the dog, an old red heeler named Soot, to find her and lead her back. She stabbed herself with a fence staple trying to help mend wire and sat in the dirt pressing her palm against her skirt while Teddy crouched beside her without asking and wrapped it with a strip of cloth he'd pulled from his pocket. It's not deep, he said. I know it's not deep. You should wear work gloves. I don't have work gloves. He looked at her hand, still holding it. I'll get you some. He did. The next morning, there was a pair of leather gloves on the kitchen table next to her coffee cup. They were the right size, which meant he'd paid attention to her hands, which was not something she'd expected from him and which she thought about more than she probably should have. The days fell into a pattern. She wasn't unhappy. That surprised her. She'd expected to be miserable in a quiet way. Politely, privately miserable, the way women in her situation were supposed to be, and instead she was just tired in a clean physical way that left little room for anything else. She slept hard and woke up before the sun and made coffee and stood on the porch while the sky went from black to dark blue to the particular pale gold that happened just before the mountains showed their edges. And it was the best part of every day, that 10 minutes before the ranch woke up. Teddy found her there one morning and stood beside her without speaking, and she handed him his cup and he took it, and they watched the light come in together. It felt like something they'd always done. She didn't say that out loud. The trouble arrived in late October, on a gray morning with the smell of coming snow. His name was Clifford Strauss, and he rode in with 2 men she didn't know, and a manner that made Soot growl from the porch steps. He was a broad man, well-dressed in the way that men who've recently acquired money are well-dressed. Too many buttons, too much polish. And he smiled at Mirabel when she answered the door with the particular smile of a man who is used to doors being opened by women and then getting out of the way. Mrs. Callum, he said, and somehow made the name sound like a question. Is your husband about? He is. What's your business? The smile didn't waver. That's between me and him, I'm afraid. This is his house, Mirabel said, but it's also mine. So, he looked at her for a moment, the way men like that do, trying to figure out how serious you are. And then he stepped back and waited while she went to get Teddy from the barn. She stood in the doorway of the barn and watched Teddy's face change when she told him who was out front. It only lasted a second, the change. His jaw tightened, and then he set down the harness he'd been working on, very carefully, like he was putting something away. Go inside, he said. Tell me what's happening first. He looked at her. She didn't move. Strauss owns the land company that holds the note on the east pasture, he said. The note my father took out before he died. It comes due at the end of the year. And I don't have what's needed to clear it. She waited. He's been buying up properties in this valley for 2 years, Teddy said. Men who can't make their notes. He gets the land at a fraction. Then he runs cattle on it or sells it to the railroad or both. He paused. He's been waiting on mine. How much is the note? He told her. It was not a small number. She did the arithmetic quickly in her head, the way she'd always been able to do, and it was not a number that could be fixed easily, But it was also not a number that was impossible. It depended on the cattle prices and the winter, and a few other things that weren't certain. But it wasn't impossible. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he repeated, like he wasn't sure what she meant. "Go talk to him. I'll be inside." She was not inside. She stood at the kitchen window where she could see the porch and watch the conversation, which lasted 10 minutes and ended with Strauss putting his hat back on with a little too much deliberateness. He said something she couldn't hear. Teddy said something back. Strauss smiled the smile again and got on his horse. Teddy came back and looking like he'd swallowed something sharp. "He wants an answer by the 1st of December, he said. "Sell the east pasture at his price, or he calls the note early and takes the whole property. He can do that. His lawyer wrote the terms." A pause. "My father didn't read them carefully enough." Mirabel sat down at the table. She folded her hands on the surface and looked at them for a moment. The ring Teddy had put there a month ago, the new calluses from the fence work, the faint scar from the staple. "My aunt's husband left me money," she said, "when he passed. I didn't mention it because it didn't seem. I didn't know what it was for yet." Teddy went very still. "It's not everything you need," she said, "but it's most of it. Combined with what you have and what the fall cattle price looks like, I think it's enough to clear the note." "Mirabel, I'm not giving it to you," she said. "I'm putting it in as a partner. That's different." She looked up at him. "Unless you don't want a partner." He looked at her for a long time. She could see him working through it, the pride and the practicality and the something else underneath both of those, the thing she couldn't name yet. "Why?" he said finally. "Because it's my ranch too," she said. "You said it was. The day I got here, when Rowena showed me the house and told me where everything was kept, you'd already arranged all of it. You'd made a room for me before you'd ever met me." She paused. "A man who does that isn't trying to take something from a woman. He's trying to make something with her, so, yes or no?" The wind moved outside. Somewhere in the barn one of the horses knocked against the stall wall. "Yes," Teddy Callum said. "What followed was not simple. Nothing worth doing ever is." Strauss didn't accept the counter easily. He came back twice more, both times with his lawyer, and both times Mirabel was at the table beside Teddy, with the ledger open and the numbers laid out, and both times she watched the lawyer read her figures and try to find the error and not find it. Strauss stopped looking at her like she was going to get out of the way. She thought that was progress. The cattle sold better than expected in November. She'd done her research quietly, writing to the buyers in Billings herself, in her own name, and the price they got was 15 cents a head above what Teddy had estimated. He didn't ask how she'd managed it. She didn't explain. Some things didn't need explaining. But the trouble didn't stop with Strauss. In December, she found out why. One of Teddy's hired hands, a young man named Ike Fowler, who'd been with the ranch 3 years, had been passing information to Strauss's foreman. Cattle counts, pasture conditions, the exact amount of the note. Small things that added up to a picture. Ike came to her first, not to Teddy, and he stood in the kitchen with his hat in his hands and told her what he'd done and why. A debt of his own, a threat against his younger sister, and she listened to all of it without interrupting. When he was done, she said, "Did you tell Strauss about the money I put in?" "No, ma'am." "I swear it. I stopped before that." "I stopped when?" "I stopped when I saw you weren't what I expected." "What did you expect?" He looked at the floor. "Someone easier to watch go under." She sent him to Teddy. Whatever Teddy decided about Ike Fowler, it was Teddy's decision to make. The ranch hands were his. But she went and stood outside the barn door while they talked, not listening exactly, just present, in case. Teddy let him stay. He docked his wages and gave him a month's probation and made him ride to town and tell the county sheriff about Strauss's foreman and the arrangement. The sheriff, a careful woman named Beaumont, who'd held that office 11 years and didn't waste words, opened an investigation that winter. It turned out Strauss had made similar arrangements with at least 4 other properties in the valley. The land company's papers got looked at by people in Billings. By February, Clifford Strauss had more to worry about than Bridle Creek. He sold his interests in Harrow Creek that spring and left the county. Mirabel heard about it on a Tuesday morning, from Rowena, who'd heard it from the barber, who'd heard it from the sheriff. She was standing in the kitchen when she heard it, and she didn't say anything for a moment, and then she put the kettle on. Teddy came in a few minutes later, and she handed him his coffee and said, "He's gone." Teddy said, "I know." They stood in the kitchen with their coffee, and the morning light came in through the east window and fell across the floor in a long stripe, and outside Soot barked once at something, and then was quiet. "I want to put the money toward the fence on the south line," Mirabel said. "It's not going to survive another winter without repair." "I know," he said again, "and I want chickens." He looked at her. "I know you think chickens are not worth the trouble," she said. "I've heard you say it twice. But they are worth the trouble, and I want them, and I'm your partner, so." There was a pause, and then, slowly, like something he'd been saving, Teddy Callum smiled. It was not a big smile. It changed his whole face. "You can have chickens," he said. She looked at him. He was looking at her. Outside, the wind moved through the grass in that particular way it had, bowing down and then rising again, bowing down and then rising, and she thought about all the things she hadn't known when she signed her name in that solicitor's office in Knoxville with her hand shaking. She thought about what her aunt's letters hadn't said, and what they hadn't needed to say, and what she understood now that she hadn't understood then. "I didn't think it was going to be like this," she said. "Like what?" She thought about how to say it, like something I chose. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You did choose it." "I know." She looked at him. "I just didn't know it was going to feel that way." The coffee was getting cold. Neither of them moved. "My mother said something to me before she died," Teddy said finally. "She said the trouble with loneliness is that it starts to feel like personality. You forget it's just a condition." He paused. "She was talking about me." Mirabel looked at the side of his face, the healed cut on his cheekbone, the way he held his cup with both hands. "She was right," she said. "I know she was." Outside, Soot barked again, and the horses moved in the barn, and the morning light shifted as the clouds moved east, and Mirabel Knox Callum stood in her kitchen in eastern Montana and felt, for the first time since she'd stepped off that stage into a silence she hadn't known how to read, that the ground beneath her feet was solid, not perfect, not finished. There was still the south fence and the second barn, and the question of what they were going to do about water rights in a dry summer, and 100 other things she didn't know the answer to yet. But solid. She could work with solid.